What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the analog Heat+fx. Now there's a lot to discuss with this, especially in means of whether or not this is worth $1,000, to which case I will say if any of you own a DAW, you do not need this. If you have, gear requirement syndrome and you're like, man, I need this thing, you do not need it. But it can be cool, and there's a lot of things that I like about it. There's a lot of things that I don't like about it. I'm more so hoping that Electron sees this and answers some of the questions and feature requests that I would like to see in the future that I don't think would be too difficult to implement, but also give you some kind of showcase about what to expect in case if you ignore that warning that I just gave you and you're like, I gotta have one. This is not meant for people like me. I'll say that one more time. This is not meant for people like me, people that are in the DAW, people that are super accustomed to insane amounts of distortion, doing mastering and pushing everything to the clip to zero method from bathymetrics, right? Clip it and limit, right? This is more so, I think, designed for people that have outboard gear or hardware and are looking for a really high quality distortion unit that has 8 different kinds of pedals, if you will, instead of, a super versatile distortion plugin or something. And the reason why I say that is because that's usually where this price thing gets into play. If you were to just go buy a distortion pedal, like you might end up spending $300-400 just on a single thing and being like, this is the greatest thing ever, right? It's hard. We're in a different world here, and that's not a justification for this. And I actually do think that this piece of hardware is quite a bit overpriced. That being said, I do want to try to showcase what it's good at, and I also want to point out what it's not good at, and that's what we're going to be discussing in this video today. A lot of the things that I'm going to be doing are going to be blowing this distortion out of the water because that's why I bought it, and that's how I intended to use it, and by golly, that's how I'm going to showcase it. I'm also going to be talking about some mastering situations that I was hopeful for and some disappointments that I have, because my initial impression with this was that I can use the final piece of this on the chain, meaning the distortion, to actually clip the signal, but no matter what you do, you still have to add some kind of limiter at the end, which is disappointing, but we'll do that. So to kick things off, please hit the like button and subscribe. We're going to be just showcasing a cool little respace that I have. Let me go ahead and turn the mix down all the way. That's what we're working with here. And this is going to be the first piece that I want to talk to you about. Now, obviously that got a lot louder. When you're looking at this and you're listening to the sounds, analog and this box in general as a whole does a lot of stuff to the dynamics and the actual volume of the sound. For the most part, it actually reduces the sound by quite a bit until you utilize some of the other tools in here. So don't be deceived by the actual volume thinking that it sounds better. I want you to pay attention to the character and the timbre of the sound in order to make a more informed judgment call, as opposed to being like, well, it's louder, so it's got to be dope, right? It can get loud, but you got to be careful with it. We are going to make things loud, but just keep that in mind. I'm also going to be doing some very small comparisons to the disc tube culture, which, by the way, once we hit 20,000 subscribers, I'm going to be giving one of these away. This is my favorite analog type distortion on the market right now. If anybody has any other recommendations, let me know. I might check it out. Saturn II doesn't count. That's, you know what I mean? Like something weird, something more analog based. But with all that being said, I also have a stream that I just did that's about 5 hours long, to where I'm actually doing an in-depth comparison using the disc tube culture on drums, bass, mastering situations, and whatnot. Wow. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to go ahead and hit F, and I'm going to take you through some of these distortion units, and then I'm going to be showing you how the other stuff following it makes a difference. Right now we're on the clean boost. Let's go ahead and turn everything up. And I'll start here, just so that way you can get your ears accustomed to what you're about to hear. And let's go ahead and crank this puppy. So we're back on clean boost now. Now the distortion is analog, the subsequent EQ is analog, the filter is analog, and this is really cool. It's also included as the main stuff within the Mark 1 and Mark 2. And this is really like where most of the magic is. The effects are digital, that you can rearrange these effects and whatnot, but this is going to lead to the first thing that I'm actually really disappointed in, is that you'll see here that you have the heat and then an analog filter and an analog EQ, to which they both actually sound really good, which I'll demo in just a second. But the problem that I have with it is that you can't rearrange these. So ideally what I would like to do, especially in a means of sound design, is put these two before the distortion and then use the distortion as a means of clipping. Typically in the past, at least from how somebody explained it to me, Data Broth in particular, most people do distortion and then they use a filter to cut out all the harsh frequencies and stuff. And you know what, that makes sense. But in my particular ideology, I guess, and how I like to do sound design, you'll see that just about everything that I have, including the master, has some kind of newfangled saturate on it or some kind of clipping situation. I mean, hell, the last video that I just posted was about clippers, and that's why it makes such a big deal. If you look at this on the overdrive situation, in a means of loudness and in a means of aggressiveness, this is a luff meter, in case if you're not familiar with it. And if I were to just hit any note, you're going to see that we're hitting it like -5. And this says that we have headroom. -2, barely touching. So in a means of making this constant aspect of wanting stuff to get loud, please don't quote damn world to me or whatever, because there is a little bit of gray area in between. But this is really important to me because I like to make things loud and I like to make things aggressive. And when you send really hard distortion in tandem with filtering and stuff, it creates a really dope relationship between all the things at hand. That's why I really want this to be able to move these around in a more modular way. You can move all of the other effects around, so you can do that either by interacting with this here, or a more efficient way to do it if you're working on the computer is to turn something on like this and then just kind of rearrange this how you want to. This can easily be solved, even if you can't add or switch these around. Like, I could accept that, but how cool would it be and how easy would it be to implement either a limiter that is post, you can put it on the compression, so where it goes compression into limiting, or something else that you can do is just add a digital dedicated soft clipper, because that will solve all the issues that I have with this effect unit as a whole, and means of like how I want to route things and even quote unquote do some kind of mastering, because you can do a lot with the distortion and the EQ, quite a bit. And let me demonstrate that. We're going to leave this on the clean boost and we're going to make sure that this is down, but check out how this brings out some of the detail. It's almost like a built-in OTT that doesn't ruin the rest of the scene. Now, obviously, if we were to boost the lows anymore, then it's going to be blown out, but just for the sake of, you know, demonstration, let's go ahead and check that out. And what's also really cool is that if you move in between these different distortion types, you're going to notice that these EQs have certain characteristics and certain shapes to them. They're not all just flat lines. And so because of that, you can shape sounds in a lot of different ways just by manipulating these two. Now, if that wasn't enough, something else that's also neat is that you can actually get this to be insanely loud just by even turning off the filter and turning the dirt up, which I'm not really sure what exactly that is, but it just adds extra aggression to the actual sound. Look at that. And to be honest, it actually sounds really good when you just have a typical Reese and you're starting to do some kind of pitch bending and whatnot. I mean, even just this on its own without any filtering in particular. That's a pretty fat sound, right? So with that being said, it's really awesome, but the problem is that if you're using either the clean boost or the saturation, which will hard clip or will do some kind of soft clipping, once you start to manipulate the EQ and the filter, especially with the drive, you lose the clipping aspect of that. So you have to use something on the outside. That's why I'm using a Pro L, because otherwise this is going to be blown out of the water. Watch your ears. So we're already hitting at plus 3 dB, which is really important to keep in mind that decibels don't equate to LUFS. They are two different measuring things, but this is more so for a sense of mastering, and this is for a sense of how to reference it, if that makes sense. So because of that, that's why I think that it would be really important to have something like that. Now, because this is analog, I don't necessarily know if you can rearrange the circuitry or the signal path of these digitally, right? Because these are actually hardwired in. This thing actually gets hot. But if it's possible, that would be such a game changer, at least for me, and really justify this price point, because that means that now I'm starting to actually really consider throwing this on a master chain and being able to boost sounds really high and really hard. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other things that this has to offer in particular, which are the other effects, right? Because we've got some digital, which would be warble, bit crushing, compression, bass mono, which is great, chorus, delay, and reverb, respectively. Let's go ahead and just demo those, and then I'll talk about the modulation aspect of it. There's one weird quirk that I would like to see in the future, but there are some really cool options, especially within this, that you can see what the LFOs are doing, you can see what the envelope is doing, what the gate, the follow, and the trigger and all that, and that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and hit a different key now. Maybe we'll move up to G, and I'm just going to take you through what some of these effects sound like. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to move the bass mono over here, and then I'm going to turn that on. Maybe we'll start with that. We just go mono bass, and we can set our crossover, which means that nothing is going to go or be affected by anything lower than this threshold here. You can also filter it, which is nice. And you'll see that a lot of these actually have different filters on them, which is kind of like the holy grail or saving grace about how you can get some interesting movement out of this, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's go ahead and turn the warble on. We can add some noise to it if we want. Let's go ahead and introduce one of those filters real quick. And we're just going to turn this down a little bit. So now you can actually hear the warbling. Now we have a bit crusher. We also have the compressor, which if you want to make stuff really loud, you want to set it after your heat, and this gets really aggressive. Nice. This is a sidechain filter, so it'll dictate what part of the frequency range will actually activate the sidechain if you want. As you can see, you don't want to use it that way, but you can get stuff to be extremely loud if you want to push it that hard. This is a great addition. I think that a lot of people were wanting this from the Mark II, because I think the Mark II doesn't actually have that, but this is definitely a nice addition as far as controlling dynamics. Let's go ahead and take a look at the chorus now. To me, this isn't actually making a whole lot of difference. So maybe what we can do is we can switch this to something that is not going to phase like that. We do have a delay, which is really cool because not only does it have a built-in filter to it, some of these have different modes that you can send, return, or mix into. We're going to set this to mix. And one thing that I do appreciate about this is that with the time, you will actually get some really cool pitching and jumping. So if you want to combine that with stuff in your DAW on the outside, this is a very popular tool that I often do whenever trying to get glitches and stuff. But check this out. Let's go ahead and turn the chorus off. Now let's go ahead and mess with the time. Which is pretty cool. And you can also set an LFO or an envelope follower to this, which is really nice. Let's go ahead and use the same sound. We're going to be taking a look at the reverb now. So I'm going to take the input filtering and go here. And then we're going to make the feedback shelving about here and just turn the gain up. And we're going to set the decay time here. Now, something that is really cool is that if you right click this, then you can set a modulation source to this. So if we go envelope destination and then hop over to the modulation real quick, we are going to turn the depth down. So that way, whenever this is crossing this threshold, it's actually going to duck the reverb. So you can see. And then it'll create that reverb after. We're going to set a long release on this. And then let's see if we can come back to this and turn this up a little bit more. Make this a little bit bigger. So maybe we should put that envelope on this, and that way we pull off of the decay. So now this should be at 0. And now we can change this modulation here to back off of the release a bit to reintroduce some of that tail. There we go. But you can still tell that the reverb on this is pretty digital sounding. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's just one of those things that's like, all right, well, you know, it's not going to be like a crazy convolution reverb or something, but that's fine. It's serviceable. That seems more like a typical use case. And there is something to be said about having control over a box right here, like of a master set of effects that are pretty cool, because if I want to boost it up and make it all nice and hot, I can do that. If I want to come into the actual menus here and scroll through whichever piece that I want to work with, say this, and then I go into effects, then I can actually adjust this in real time, and that's kind of nice. So I was doing the wrong one. Let's go ahead and scroll all the way over to that reverb now. There we go. And along with this, you know what I mean, there is something to be said about having some fun with being able to do this, because whenever we're working on these kinds of things, you know, you might want to be recording automation in real time. And so having a quick access to a bunch of these effects, if you like to record, that might be interesting to you. So there is that. Now within the modulation, actually before I get into that, you can kind of tell like the effects are okay. I don't think that they're the main selling point behind this, unless if you really just like to mess with stuff as a whole. If you're going to do sound design with this, my suggestion is that you kind of just treat this like an RC Color 20 or something, or maybe I wouldn't say anything along the sort of multipass or anything like that, but whatever kind of multi effect you can think of, this would be like a real analog version of that, except you have to have the box with it. The trade-off is that you get to move all this stuff real time and you don't have to have multiple VSTs open, so you could be doing something in one synth and have this open and be tweaking the distortion, which is kind of nice. But again, that's a pretty high price point for something like that. Now, going into the modulation here, you have 3 LFOs and then you have an envelope follower. You've also got some other stuff here within like CV inputs and whatnot, but I never use that kind of stuff, so I'm not the person to talk about that. But with these modulations, it is really cool that you can modulate each other, which means that you can technically build a custom smooth curved LFO. I'll show you how to do that. So if I take LFO2, this is set to random. I'm going to send this to LFO1 and set it to the speed. Because if you, sorry, I'm going to actually set this to the multi, sorry. So with this, if you take a look, and right now it's on a triangle wave, you'll see that it's doing just a regular shape. And whenever we turn this up, you'll see that this is going to start adjusting now and making interesting and unpredictable shapes. Now, this is cool that we have the ability to do this, but the reason why I dislike it as opposed to just having this as a shape in its entirety is that this takes up a slot for your modulation sources. So altogether, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, give or take in total. Plus you also have the modulation on the regular filter, which this goes to LFO1, by the way. So whatever shape LFO1 is, this is going to overtake that. If you take a look here, you're going to see that this is going to be bouncing around and doing the same curves. So 9, I guess, if you will, and using 1 or 2 to manipulate these kind of blows, because there's a bunch of stuff that I would want to try to utilize in order to manipulate and make the craziest sounds that I possibly can, right? So it's cool that you can do it. It's kind of unfortunate that you can't just have this set up as like an extra waveform. I think that that's a pretty easy fix in an update. It's digital, so you know, why not? Please add that. But when it comes down into it, from a sound design perspective, again, the biggest qualms that I have for this is that I can't manipulate these two and put it on the other side. There's no limiting solution. There's no clipping solution to be the final piece of the chain, unless if I want to abandon these. Most people would probably have a limiter at the end of their chain anyways, so why not just add one? Just put it, you know, at the end, or just have some kind of toggle or some kind of like, you know, master control that's built in. You don't even have to be able to adjust it. When I had the poly in play, there was a built-in limiter. You could barely do anything with it. Like there were hardly any settings, but it existed. So that way, at least your signal wouldn't clip. I would much prefer that than not having one at all. Watch me say that, and then Electron just like adds like the worst possible one that you possibly can. What can you say? So getting into that, I'll show you a couple of examples that I've made just as a means of like getting some different kinds of varieties of sounds. I'm still tweaking some of the parameters, but I do think that this is a decent showcase on how you can expect to use this just with the effect suite that this comes with. I'm actually going to pull back off of this and go back into 2 voices here. And then some of these actually had some other stuff on them. So let's go through maybe this one. And as you can see, this is being randomized, so sometimes it comes in, sometimes it comes out. But what you'll also notice is that the filters on all of these are also moving around. So there's a filter that's happening on the DJ filter. There's a filter that's happening over here on the warble, because if you turn everything off, then it just adds as a multi-part filter. So we can actually move that around, maybe open up the signal a little bit more. Let's go ahead and do that as well. If if we want to add a little bit more interest to this, then we can actually turn on the delay, and this will actually add a little bit of tail to this. Let's go ahead and push this up just a little bit more. And without it, it sounds like this. So I think now would be a good time to talk about the different kinds of filters. So let's go ahead and kind of just let it do its thing and sweep through some of these. Actually, what might be cool is to see if I can, it doesn't look like I can do that, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the modulation off on this, and we're just going to sweep this ourselves and create our own movement, because I think that would be fun. We need to turn this back on. Sorry about that. Go ahead and move this to the bandpass. This is the one that I use the most. Let's go ahead and add some more dirt. I think the sweet spot for the mids is actually in the mids. So don't treat this like a exponential like EQ type thing to where like 1 to 500 is right here and then it like significantly goes up. I think that this is actually evenly distributed. I think the clean boost sounds my favorite for the most part. But as you can hear, thank you, Richard. As you can hear, this sounds very different whenever I'm switching through these distortion models, and that's part of the fun, right? Is the input signal plus the distortion type plus the amount of dirt plus the EQ plus the filter, obviously. That's like kind of self-explanatory, but as you can see, like there's a bunch of different timbres and stuff, and while it's all like pretty filthy, sometimes certain combinations that you get because it's analog and based off of voltage as opposed to binary numbers is going to give you some relatively interesting results. So I wanted to kind of just go through this and show you like a use case about how this is set up with the modulation and how I've kind of set these to different destinations and whatnot, because that's how anybody that's a sound designer would probably use something like this. That being said, I don't think that this has enough to actually like make the craziest kinds of basses that you could possibly dream of. It might help you get started though. So, you know, one thing that you could definitely consider is setting up, you know, especially if you're working within the DAW, don't just be like, I'm analog heat only, that's the only thing I'm going to use. Like, nah, dude, like, you know, don't sweat it. If you've already got these tools, then set something up to where you're like, all right, let's pull up one of these patches and be like, you know, fire away, let's see what happens, right? Because like, that's what a sound designer should do, right? So I don't know what this is going to sound like. Hopefully it's somewhat decent, but let's take a listen to that. And I'm going to play around with the distortion and see what that sounds like on bass. that's more like it. Let's go ahead and do a little bit more to this just for fun and add some more stuff to this. And obviously this is way overkill. This is not usable as a tangible bass, but hey, just for the sake of creating something interesting, let's go ahead and crank this puppy up and see just how loud we can make this just for fun. Oh, fuse compressor. I want to see how loud this is. So just for comparison's sake, let's go ahead and turn this off and see what that sounds like without this, because it might sound 10 times better, but that's why we're here on this demo, to see what it's all about. So as you can hear, it's still pretty crunchy and still pretty gritty, but obviously that analog distortion adds quite a bit of like to it, for lack of better description. Let's go ahead and do a quick comparison now though. And again, when I turn this on, don't worry so much about volume. We want to be paying attention to timbre and stuff. But let's see if the Dis2 culture can kind of hang and give us some of those same gritty, insane, I don't know, Audica types of sounds. So I don't know what the shapes look like on these, but this is a triode, pentode 1, 2, and 3, so different amalgamations of those. They are different distortion circuits, or rather different distortion curves than what these have to offer, I believe. So they shouldn't sound the same, I don't think. But anyways, let's go ahead and crank this up. We're going to keep the mix at 100%, maybe match the volume just to make it loud, and see what that does. This seems like complete outlaw, and I love it. Also, if you're interested in these presets, you can get them from Alckemy.com. I know that this is like 1.01% of what kind of sounds people would be trying to get out of this, but like, what are you here for if you're not part of my channel already, right? So I guess something that we could do is use it on something a little bit softer. But again, I'm about extremes. I want to see how far I can take this to blow shit up. And that's just kind of what we do here. So let me make sure that that's doing its thing. There we go. And let's see what this does. We do also have some EQ options here if you want to mess with that. And keep in mind too, like you could, as cool as this is, like just remember that you can map any of this stuff to a CC if you've already got a distortion rack or whatever. So like you could essentially build your own type of analog heat type effect in a digital way if that's what you want to do. But look, for the sake of just having fun, let's go ahead and swap back over to this and see what this sounds like. That's pretty sick. So all in all, when it comes to bass design, which is the most important thing on my channel and the kinds of things that I do, if you didn't know, you can see that there's a lot of character that comes out of this, but it's not really there's a lot left to be desired in a means of how to control this. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a break off of bass. I'm sure that people's ears are tired, or you might have already clicked off of this video. So we are going to actually delete an instance of the analog heat because you can only have one, otherwise it turns whatever track you're still leaving it on off. Sometimes it'll crash your engine. Something that we can do is I can pull up the fast beat. And this is a tune that I'm working on. It's not done yet. It's like 70% done. And we can talk about the mastering situation that I would like to have experienced whenever I bought this, but you'll see that I still have to have stuff on the outside. So let's go ahead and turn everything off except for this Pro L. You'll see that it's at 0. This is just to protect myself and you, even though that I'm playing this at low volume. But I'm just going to jump to the main part here and make sure that this is in raw. There we go. And let's go ahead and just listen to what this sounds like without any other post-processing going on. So.
Well, goddamn.
Shout out to all my haters. Sorry, quick thing. But aside from that, let's go ahead and maybe turn this down by like 3 dB. And what we're going to do here is just give ourselves just a little bit more headroom to work with on this. There we go. So that way, whenever we're actually doing some stuff to this, we can kind of look at some differences between some mastering situations. So one thing that is really important to consider is, I'm actually going to backtrack on what I just said. Let's go ahead and look at the clipping situation that we have whenever we're using this on the master channel. So I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to add that aspect of analog Heat+fx. And then I'm going to go into just a brand new, nothing else is on. And by default, it's going to sound way more quiet for a couple of reasons. The main reason is because the compressor is turned on, because this is going to reduce the signal substantially. Let me move this up and then go back here. But start from the main somewhere in here. So if we were to turn this on, very quiet. Let's go ahead and crank this puppy up. Yeah, it's very, very quiet. And that's with nothing else going on. So this is one of the main problems that I have with this in the first place, is that you can see that it reduces the signal quite a bit. Also, for some reason on the volume, like, you can't actually control the main volume. When I first got this, I actually thought that this was broken. I ran it through like some of the diagnostics tests and stuff like that, and even though I didn't get any errors, I didn't realize that this is the headphone settings and also the out settings, not equatable to equivalent rather to the volume that you have here. You can also control the input volume, but this doesn't control the output volume. It just controls how hot you send the signal into it, which usually just ends up distorting the sound even more. Very strange. So in any case though, for some reason this just turns it down by quite a bit. It's something to get used to. It's something to reorient like your whole mind frame about doing this. And if you're familiar with gain staging and whatnot, then like it's not that big of a deal. But for me personally, I have a clip it and limit approach to how I master stuff. And maybe that hurts me in the long run, but that's just how I prefer to do things. And so this is not conducive to that at all. That being said, let's go ahead and send this through the actual heat. I don't think that anything on here other than maybe the bass mono would be useful. We'll talk about the compressor in a bit, but really what I wanted to do was to be able to use this, the dirt, and the EQ in order to get a nice fat master, and then hopefully have some kind of limiting solution at the end. And I know that I might be beating a dead horse, But because I can't rearrange these, that means that if I wanted to clip this signal, I'd have to only turn it to here. And because there's no limiter or something to bring the volume back up to a ceiling, that means that I still have to use something on the outside. And what that means for people that have hardware is that if you're using this particular situation, that means that you still have to send it to an outboard or master compressor / limiter, or a clipper or something of the sort. I don't actually, does an actual clipper exist? Like, I guess you could use 2 if you wanted to, but it doesn't push it back up to 0. So you could be like super duper effects, 2 analog heats. I'm sure Electron would love that. And then you can send it into a master limiter of hardware, but it's like, there's got to be a better solution to that, right? Got to be a better solution. But anyways, let's go ahead and turn this back up and see if we can make this sound any fatter than where we started. So it's kind of unfair because like I've already kind of like squashed the signal of what we're using in the first place, but this is the kind of music I make, so you know, what can you say? Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is okay, so let's go ahead and go to Clean Boost. Actually, if you take a look at you'll see that no matter how hard I rise this, so this will work. If you start touching this other stuff, crazy mode. Pretty wild. All right, let's go ahead and back off this just a bit. I'm gonna double click here. So, you know, this provides just a little bit more balance to this. We've boosted the hang a little bit. But look at how much crispier that can be. We got a little more room to play with. So this is about as close as I can get without a limiter. But if you look here, we still got a little headroom left. So we can push that up just a little bit more. Now, one other thing that I want to mention with this particular thing is that I know that I totally destroyed that, but just as a means of like what a typical use case would be, right? Because obviously, you know, I probably could have prepared a better example, but it is what it is. So one thing that is really interesting about this though is that even though this will clip and you cannot push it, this will not actually push the dynamics into like a sausage, if you will. If you take a look at the oscilloscope, whenever we turn this back on, we're just going to leave this on the clean boost. You're actually going to notice that this is going to have some dynamics in it. Whereas if I were to just take this and maybe turn on something like the newfangled audio saturate, you'll see here that everything is going to be relatively flat. So let me move off of this real quick while I turn this on. So that's just something to be mindful of. I'm not really sure what this means for people that are wanting to master and stuff, but these are just things that I've picked up on that do make a difference. For me, it's a lot easier to push a signal a lot harder if it's already as flat as possible. And this is generally how I try to master, or generally try to mix anyways. If you look at my master channel, the only thing that I have on here on all of my tunes is a 0.1 decibel clipper, and then just taking a look at what my limiting situation is, and if I have headroom, then I can push it up a little bit more. If it's already hitting at the ceiling, I just don't touch it. But as you can see, it's already like pretty much as flat and like just decked out as possible. And so depending on what kind of music you make, you might find that having a clipper that still has dynamics is a good thing. You might find that it's not a good thing depending on what it is that you want to do. I'm always about trying to get the loudest and just like, you know, smashed. It's just the way that I like to do things, but there you go. So perhaps one more thing that we can do just for fun to try to wrap up this video, because it's getting kind of long, is let's go ahead and take some kind of drum break. Maybe one that's not, sure, something that's a little bit different, yeah. So behind this, it could be kind of fun or kind of interesting to take a look at what's going on here. I'm going to move this out of the compression here so that way I don't have any other kind of influence going on with this. And let's take a listen to how this might sound with doing some stuff with drums. I've seen in a lot of other reviews that people are like, man, these distortion units, or like these reviewers don't do a good job because they always blow drums out of proportion. But again, I'm being kind of unapologetic about it, that like I want that. So if that's not your thing and you're looking for like how to make ambience with analog heat, this is not the video for you. So anyways, let's go ahead and run that. Let's go ahead, we'll reset this to an initial preset again, to where everything is back at the start. I'm going to turn this off. Maybe we will use a bit of compression on this actually, and just see what kind of timbres and tones we can get out of it just for fun. And then we'll wrap up our final thoughts. Okay, so here we go. Let's take a look at that luff meter as well and just see what we're at. All right. I do like the rough crunch on drums. Sounds pretty nice. Turn the compressor on now. We're going to toss this before the heat. little parallel compression. So what I would typically do on this, especially if you're sound designing, is to not run this on the master and just sound design to it. I wanted you all to be mindful of that, because if we were to put this just on the master here, and let's say I wanted to pull up something like rolling sampler, and we're just going to take that part real quick. Wait, hold on 1 second. Let me just wait for this to roll over. No pun intended. There we go. Then one thing that you should be mindful of is that whenever you pull this back out, this is the process signal, but because we've got an analog heat over this, this is now going to be ran through the same chain again. And sometimes that can actually be a very viable and a really useful way to do sound design, but you can always just drag this back over because it's going to keep the same settings, and then kind of pull this out with a rolling sampler as well. But just for demonstration purposes, let's take a listen to what that sounds like now. Cool. Let's do it again. Maybe move from over here. So you can see that this kind of happened in stages, right? So we can kind of just play these one after another, if you will. And you can kind of see how this kind of just continues to get fatter and fatter over time. And like I said, this can be a cool way for you to kind of keep rinsing things if you like doing sound design that way, but what can you say? Wild. So yeah, you can definitely get some big sounds with this, and I'm curious to see, you know, for people that are a little more experienced with me, experienced than me rather, or maybe know a thing or two about this box a little bit better than I do, or just about, you know, digital signal processing and whatnot. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on about this, and I'm also curious for you all, the consumers, my audience, my friends, whether or not you think that this is something that is for you. Definitely a lot to talk about within this, and I know that it took me an hour to kind of figure out whether or not this was going to be, you know what I'm saying, like the tried and true thing with this or whatever, but it's important because, for one, this thing is stupid expensive. Two, this goes into a lot of questions that I think a lot of people have when it comes to, do I need this, or what are my alternatives, or how can I actually use this with a DAW integration? I'm going to recap. I don't think that this was meant for me. I don't think that this was meant for most of the people that watch my channel, unless if you are really familiar with hardware and outboard gear. I don't think that this is the answer, end all be all for your mastering solution. You can get some really gnarly and fat sounds out of this, but you probably don't need the effects version of it. Even with the effects, they're kind of subtle. So I would say if you've got a Mark II, you're probably okay. Definitely, obviously, I really like the analog circuitry that's built into this, but I will say that if Electron is listening or they watch this video, please add a limiter, or add another soft clipper to the end of the chain or somewhere within here that I can utilize all these tools, both from a sound design and a mastering perspective, in order to really get the most out of this box, because I think that will be the last final component to unlocking its full potential for just using it in the box alone. That's assuming that I'm not using a limiter on the outside already, or I'm not using something else on the outside as a whole, but it would really eliminate the need to go buy other stuff. So heed my words. With that being said, thank you all so much for listening. If you all have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments section. Check out alckemy.com if you want to support the channel, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'll see you guys later.